Okay, so today I'm going to talk about how in 1999 Bill Clinton betrayed the working class and how the Democratic Party betrayed the working class. So, in 1933, in the wake of the stock market crash of 1929, the Congress passed Glass-Steagall, which was a banking act that regulated the commercial and investment banking industries. It separated the two. And basically, this law was necessary. The government was doing its job, was seeing the unethical business practices of the top 1% and stepped in for the greater good of the working class people, and did its job, basically. The government stepped in and said, hey, you know what? I think you guys are taking advantage of people. We're speaking for the majority. So in 1933, Congress passed the Glass-Steagall Act. And if you fast forward to 1999, Bill Clinton got rid of it. And he also passed NAFTA, which was like a globalization free trade act. But in 1999, he got rid of Glass-Steagall. And he basically, by doing that, betrayed his own constituents, the people that put him in power. And so now what you have is you have unfettered, unchecked lobbying power by rich, huge corporations who pay their employees barely anything, and we're supposed to subsidize these people. Working class people who have their income taxes and taken directly out of their check, that money gets subsidized, and the rich benefit from it. And the rich not only benefit from it, they benefit so greatly that 1% of the top 1%, 0.1 of 1% owns, I think, 90% of the world's wealth. So this was why stuff like the Glass-Steagall Act was passed. The reason the Glass-Steagall Act and different things like that were passed was to stop the unethical business practices of corporations, of financial institutions, of unfettered, unchecked capitalism, of financial banks, investment banking, and commercial banking. So you can look it up. You can Google it. The proof is there. It's just that nobody is actually out here speaking about it because it doesn't benefit the few. It doesn't benefit the rich. It's not what their interests are. It's not what their interests. It doesn't interest them, but it's there if you Google it. Thank God for the internet. So what you have now is you have a government who is in a unfettered corporate capitalism that is just there's just, it's a betrayal almost, and the thing is it's never going to change. It's never going to change until people stand up and say, okay, we've had enough. We need to get enough people out here and stand up and disobey. Okay, not through violence, but we need enough people out here to disobey and say, look, we're tired of this. We want somebody in government that's going to represent the majority of people, that's going to represent families. Okay, because this is never going to stop until there's a mass disobedience. Okay, the civil rights movement would have never happened if there wasn't mass disobedience. Okay, this is not going to change. In fact, it's only going to get worse unless there is a mass disruption of the system in which people disobey and people wake up and regular people give a shit. Okay, by agreeing with everything and just going along and just giving up, laying down and die, that's not going to fix anything. In fact, revolutions were never started by doing that. Revolutions were started by the majority of people waking up and disobeying. Not through violence, okay, but standing up and either marching for something that they understand, not for stupid shit, okay? This is complicated shit, but I think people can understand this if they want to understand it, if they want to learn about it. The thing is, this education is hard to find, but it is education and it is valuable. Now, I want to talk about two different things, and most people don't understand this either. What's the Federal Reserve and what is the U.S. Treasury? What's the difference between the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury? Well, the Federal Reserve is privately owned. Okay, they print the currency. They're in charge, and they're privately owned. In fact, the inside the Federal Reserve is so secretive. I mean, you can't even. It's like Fort Knox, metaphorically speaking. I mean, it's like Fort Knox. You can't get in there, but of course you can't. But a lot of people don't understand central planning. A lot of people don't understand currency manipulation. The 2008 financial collapse, that was done on an unethical scale, never before seen, not seen before since 1929. And basically, it was a criminal act. And the thing is the U.S. Treasury, which is the taxpayers, the government owns the U.S. Treasury, not private citizens. The U.S. government and the taxpayers essentially own the U.S. Treasury. The U.S. Treasury bailed out the banking institutions in 2008. Well, the reason 2008 happened was because Bill Clinton got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999, and it gave banking institutions power to facilitate what happened in 2008. So that is how it is relevant. So when Bill Clinton betrayed the working class by getting rid of Glass-Steagall, it gave banking institutions free rein to facilitate what happened in 2008 and what is still happening today. And it's going to continue to happen through predatory lending on people who are vulnerable. Predatory lending of vulnerable, misinformed people, in which if you miss your bank payment by one day, your interest rates will shoot up, 30%, 40%. It's unethical banking practices. And so it's continuing to happen, and it's going to continue to happen. People are going to get screwed again. And the only way to stop it is for mass education. Education that is actually valuable, and not education that helps facilitate unethical practices. The people don't have a legitimate government anymore. They don't. They don't have legitimate representation that's not backed up by all this corporate money, corporate greed, lobbyists, right? The system has failed so miserably. They found a way to get around democracy, to get around the Constitution. Look, the people who wrote the Constitution, they knew about central banks. They knew about the corruption that central banks could essentially facilitate. And if you read the Constitution, you'll see a section in there that speaks to central banking. They didn't want the Federal Reserve to come in. They knew about it, and it worked for a while. And eventually, government gave in, and it gave free rein to these private bankers to come in. They came in from overseas. The Rothschilds and J.P. Morgan and all them. Not even J.P. Morgan, but there was a bunch of different bankers. And they created the Federal Reserve. And basically, it was a private enterprise. And basically, our forefathers' worst nightmares were correct. Eventually happened. And so, that's where we're at today. There's very little checks and balances on the unethical practices of banking, of predatory loans. And the government has turned their back on regular people. I mean, just absolutely turned their back. It doesn't matter where you vote now, Republican, it doesn't matter who you vote for now, Republican, Democrat, it's all corrupt. There's all this corporate interests behind every party. They're like parasites infesting democracy, infesting freedom. And the Congress can just be bought for whatever price they want to be bought for. And these corporations are so powerful that the regular person is powerless to stop the greed of these corporations. And so now what they want to do is they want to go after the opioid addicts who were hurt by pharmaceutical companies who pushed their drugs in the mid-90s. And now that same pharmaceutical company, those same people, those same lobbyists are now going after the patients who got addicted to the opioids. So now the patients are looked at as the criminals when the pharmaceutical companies should be held liable. They should be some type of criminal prosecution that takes place. We shouldn't be going after patients who have legitimate pain. I just wanted to speak on that. Now that's a different topic, but we can go into that later on if I have another discussion. But Bill Clinton in 1999 passed the Glass-Steagall, got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act, and the banking industry had free rein to do whatever the hell they want, and that facilitated the 2008 financial collapse. And now we're left with the remnants of a destroyed economy, of a hollowed out economy. Not to mention in 1970, when Nixon took us off the gold standard. So money is no longer backed up by anything. Money can be manipulated. And in fact, I think what you're seeing now is a collapse of the American dollar. I really think that's where we're headed. And I think they're going to do it on purpose. I think a very few percentage of the population will facilitate the collapse of the American dollar. Then I think a new global currency will come into play. And the thing is they have free rein to do whatever they want because nobody in government, nobody in Congress is standing up and saying we've had enough. So what the point of my program is I want people, regular people, to understand and educate themselves on why things are the way they are, so we can change things, so we can get people in government to actually represent us, to actually care and put their own self-interests behind the interests of the majority. We need some people in government that are willing to do that, are willing to give up their own personal aspirations and do what's right. Do what's right for the majority and for the future of this country. Because, guys, we're headed down a dark road. I mean, we're headed down. We're gonna see income inequality like I mean, it's never been seen before in America. That's where we're headed. We're headed down a road that um, is controlled solely by corporations, controlled solely by the state, which essentially the state is hijacked by the corporations. The corporations have full reign, full control. There's nobody in government who are willing to stand up. They all can be bribed. They all can be paid off quite easily. And this is what our founders of the United States, this is what our founders were afraid of. Exactly what's happening now is what our founders were afraid of. So, what do you do about it? Well, you get together and you stand up, create websites, go march on Washington, demand representation from your government, and tell them we want we want a jobs program. We want $1 trillion debt erased. We want something for the middle class, because we're tired of getting screwed over, and we're tired of people not standing up for the majority of people. We're tired of a government that is sold the majority down the river for the interest of a select few. And I mean, what you're going to see here in the coming 20, 30 years when they replace truck drivers with AI, everybody should be worried about that, because I'll tell you why. Not everybody's a doctor. Not everybody's a lawyer. And so people are going to die in the next 20, 30 years, either because they don't have health care and they can't get access to the drugs they want to get that they need. They can't get access to the health care that they need. You're not going to be able to afford a house anymore. You're not going to be able to afford transportation. And I mean, who gets sick first? The poor get sick first. So there's going to be mass sickness, mass disease, and people are going to be too poor to help themselves because nobody in government stood up when they were supposed to stand up and told these guys of the top 1% that, hey, we're tired of it. You guys have been roaming around free reign for too long now. It's time to pass some legislation, start a jobs program, erase $1 trillion worth of student loan debt, tell these corporations that they need to double their wages. Okay? It's not that hard. I mean, look, when Henry Ford created the assembly line, he realized that his workers needed to make enough money so they could actually buy the cars that he produced. So what he did was he doubled their wages. And what happened after that was the other companies had to double their wages. Okay? And the reason that Henry Ford doubled his wages was because he realized that if the majority of Americans didn't make enough money, that they would never buy his product. That's what we need now. But see, Henry Ford had help from the government. And that is what's lacking today. There is nobody in government that's standing up for people. And until we get legit representation, and I'm not talking about a lawyer who went to law school getting into government. No, no, no. That's never going to work. Okay, so the same crap of these same type of people, a lawyer, somebody in the Justice Department running for, if they were a part of that system, they're never going to fix it. We need actual people who have lived that life, who know that life, who've been on the other side, and understand what it's like to work in a factory, to understand what it's like to do the trades, that understand what it's like to be on the other side of the fence. Because until we get somebody in government that has had both viewpoints, it's hopeless. You're not going to get these lawyers who are running and who have a pack of corporate money behind them. You're not going to get these people to change anything. You're not. So there has to be somebody, a figure that comes out that has been on the other side of the fence and understands what's really at stake for the majority of people, and stands up, marches on Washington, demands actual representation, demands something. Until that happens, nothing's going to change. And in fact, it's going to get much worse. I'm telling you, it's going to get worse. I mean, there's going to be some serious homelessness. There's going to be some serious poor people in this country that not only are they poor, but they have to deal with the stigma of being poor in an American society, which is different than being poor, say, in like Thailand or a third world country. Because in America, the ideology is different. So if you have no money in America, it's even worse, because we live in a time where everybody is extremely narcissistic, right? So if you're poor and you're American poor, essentially that's even worse than being poor, say, in a small village in Thailand, right? So if you're poor in a small village in Thailand, it's not as bad because there's other poor people around you, men, women, children. People still have families. People still get married. Being poor in an American type of society, in the toxic society that we live in which narcissism and material possessions reign supreme, being poor in that type of environment is 100 times worse than being poor, say, in a small village in Thailand. So until we get actual representation in government, and we're not talking about a lawyer who went to law school and now has a corporate money behind her and now she can run. We're not talking about that. We're talking about somebody in there who's actually been on the other side of the fence and who is smart enough to understand what is going on and has enough pain and suffering in their background that makes them stand up and say, no, I'm not going to take that bribe. I'm not going to do it. This is what I believe, and I want this done for the greater good of the people. Until you get something like that, nothing is ever going to change.